the autumn of 1871, Massachusetts authorities uncovered a chilling secret in the abandoned Divine Healing Sanctuary in Salem. Beneath the chapel's floorboards, they found 847 medical journals, documenting impossible cures, paralyzed patients, walking blind individuals seeing, and tumors vanishing. But these weren't miracles. They were meticulously planned frauds, orchestrated by the Hawthorne brothers. For 37 years, they ran a so-called sanctuary, turning it into a death trap that claimed over 400 lives. The brothers had created a complex operation based on human experimentation, masking it as divine healing. In 1834, three brothers, Cornelius Obadiah and Ezekiel Hawthorne, arrived in Salem, where religious fervor and spiritual hunger were high. Cornelius, a Harvard-trained doctor; Obadiah, a preacher with a powerful voice; and Ezekiel, an expert apothecary, bought a colonial estate with a dark past. They transformed it into a sanctuary that promised miraculous cures. Help me with a like and a subscribe to motivate me to make better videos, and don't forget to comment which country you are from. But beneath the chapel, they built a hidden lab where Ezekiel concocted compounds to induce symptoms of paralysis, blindness, and tumors. Their scheme was simple but deadly. They would target wealthy individuals, secretly drugging them into fake ailments. Once their victims were debilitated, the brothers staged elaborate healing ceremonies, documenting their successes through photos and journals. But when real patients arrived with genuine conditions, they were killed using morphine and other substances, their deaths disguised as divine calls. As word spread, the brothers gained a reputation across America, but their empire of deceit would unravel when Margaret Whitmore arrived with her daughter Sarah, who had symptoms matching Ezekiel's compounds. After paying the hefty fee, Margaret watched as Sarah seemed to recover through the Hawthornes' healing rituals. But when packing up to leave, Margaret found vials containing strange substances. Her curiosity led her to uncover the horrifying truth, revealing the brothers' sinister plot. When Margaret showed the strange symbols to Mr. Henley, the apothecary who had supplied her family for years, his expression turned pale. "Mrs. Whitmore," he whispered, checking to see if anyone was around, "these aren't healing compounds. This one," he pointed to a symbol, "is belladonna, extract, a poison that causes vision issues and weakness. This is wolf's bane, which induces paralysis. And this," he hesitated, "is an antidote compound I've never seen before." Margaret's heart sank. If these vials contained poisons and antidotes, Sarah's illness had been intentionally created, and her supposed healing was a staged performance. Determined to confront the brothers, she returned to Salem that evening. When she arrived, the Hawthorne brothers greeted her with concern. Cornelius, examining the symbols she had copied, feigned confusion. "Mrs. Whitmore, someone is playing a cruel joke on you. These symbols are from an old alchemical text, nothing to do with healing or modern medicine." Obadiah added, "Satan often tests those who witness God's power. You mustn't let doubts cloud your faith." Despite their reassurances, something about their demeanor felt off. Margaret grew more suspicious and began investigating other families who had sought healing at the sanctuary. She learned from the Piton family of Concord that their son Thomas had experienced symptoms similar to Sarah's after a chance encounter with a stranger. Thomas's condition followed the same pattern: weakness, paralysis, and gradual recovery during treatment. Mrs. Piton revealed that Ezekiel seemed to know exactly when to administer medicines, as if following a schedule. Cornelius had dismissed her concerns by claiming it was divine timing, but Margaret's suspicions deepened. Her investigation led her to 12 other families, and in every case she found the same unsettling pattern: sudden symptoms, gradual deterioration, and miraculous recovery during the brothers' treatments. But it wasn't just the manufactured illnesses that troubled her. 3 families told of patients who had died while under the brothers' care, genuinely ill individuals who had come seeking help. In each case, the brothers explained that the patients had been called home by God just as healing was about to occur. Margaret realized the horrifying truth: the Hawthorne brothers were running two operations, creating fake illnesses in healthy people and charging them for miraculous cures while eliminating genuinely sick patients to maintain their reputation. The scope of their deception was staggering, and the human cost was becoming evident. Margaret decided to confront them one final time, this time not as a grateful mother but as someone determined to uncover the truth. She returned to the sanctuary on a snowy December evening, claiming she wanted to make a large donation in gratitude for Sarah's healing. The brothers welcomed her and invited her to stay for dinner. During the meal, Margaret carefully steered the conversation to their healing methods, asking about their success rate and the types of conditions they treated. They confidently spoke of their 100% success rate, claiming they only accepted patients chosen by God. When Margaret asked about patients who had died, they explained that they had been called home in a spiritual sense. After dinner, Obadiah offered to show her their private chapel, where the most intense healing ceremonies took place. As they walked through the sanctuary, Margaret noticed unusual details: thick walls, soundproofing, and furniture that could hide secret doors. When they reached the chapel, she excused herself to use the restroom, but instead hid behind a cabinet near the altar. She waited until the brothers retired for the night, then began exploring the chapel more thoroughly. Margaret's persistence paid off when she discovered a loose floorboard behind the altar. Beneath it was a narrow staircase leading into darkness. Despite her fear, she descended into what would be the most horrifying sight of her life: a fully equipped laboratory. It was a chilling testament to the Hawthorne brothers' meticulous planning of their crimes. The laboratory spanned nearly the entire foundation of the building. Shelves lined the walls, holding hundreds of glass containers labeled with symbols that identified their compounds and effects. In one corner, Ezekiel's sophisticated chemical apparatus stood. Tubes, distillation equipment, and detailed anatomical charts filled with unnerving precision. Tables covered in scales and notebooks recorded formulas and chemical reactions. The air was a strange mix of sweet floral and bitter medicinal smells. But it was the journals that revealed the full extent of the brothers' operation. Margaret found shelves lined with leather-bound records, split into two categories: divine healings and divine transitions. The healings were carefully documented cases where patients had been artificially afflicted and then cured. The transitions documented the cold-blooded elimination of genuinely ill patients. Margaret flipped through a divine healing journal and read entries like Patient 47, administered compound C7, paralysis inducer symptoms, appeared within 72 hours, full recovery after 21 days. These were chillingly precise accounts of their manipulation. The divine transition journals were even more disturbing. One entry read, Patient 23, genuine paralysis from stroke, administered morphine derivative, patient passed away peacefully, family informed of divine calling. It was clear that the brothers had been perfecting their methods for years, creating fake diseases to extract money from the wealthy, while silently killing those who sought true healing. Ezekiel's notebooks contained detailed studies on human anatomy and the effects of various compounds, essentially creating a catalog of artificial diseases and their cures. In one corner of the lab, Margaret found a small surgical area with tools and medical supplies where the brothers likely removed wax tumors they had implanted in patients while they were unconscious. The operation was chillingly precise, and Margaret discovered a ledger documenting their financial success: over $40,000 generated in just five years, representing the life savings of dozens of families. As she copied the journal's details, Margaret confirmed the worst of her suspicions. The brothers were systematically creating illnesses and killing those who could not afford to pay for their services. She had enough evidence to expose them, but as she was preparing to leave, she heard footsteps above. The brothers had realized she was missing. Racing up the stairs, Margaret found herself face to face with Cornelius, holding a lantern and wearing an expression of cold fury. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, his voice low, "I'm afraid you've seen things that weren't meant for your eyes." The confrontation that followed in the dim candlelight of the chapel would later be described in court documents as the moment when years of deception collided with an unshakable determination for truth. Cornelia stood in her way, holding a medical bag and lantern. Obadiah and Ezekiel emerged from the shadows, their faces darkening. "You've wandered into areas meant for prayer," Obadiah said, his voice full of authority. "You must have misunderstood what you've seen." Margaret, holding the papers she had copied, stood her ground, her voice unwavering despite the terror rising in her chest. "I understand perfectly," she said. "I've seen the poisons you've used to create illnesses, the fake cures you've administered, and the murders you've committed." The brothers exchanged glances, and Margaret saw the masks of compassion and authority fade, replaced by cold calculation. "You're speaking of things you couldn't possibly understand," Cornelius said, stepping closer. "What we do here represents the highest form of healing. We give people hope, strengthen their faith, and transform their lives," Cornelius said, trying to maintain his calm. "The methods we use are irrelevant compared to the spiritual benefits we provide." Margaret's voice rose with anger. "Spiritual benefits? You've been poisoning healthy people and murdering the sick. You've stolen fortunes from desperate families and built your reputation on fraud and murder." Ezekiel, who had been silent until now, whispered, "Mrs. Whitmore, you have two choices. You can leave tonight and never speak of what you've seen, or you can join the patients who have been called home by God during their healing process." The threat was unmistakable, but Margaret had prepared for this moment. During her investigation, she had written detailed letters to authorities in Boston, outlining her suspicions and the evidence she had gathered. She'd left them with her attorney, who was instructed to deliver them to the Massachusetts Attorney General if she didn't return by a specific date. "I'm afraid it's too late for threats," she replied. "I've already documented everything. If something happens to me, authorities will know exactly where to look." The brothers were taken aback. For the first time, they faced someone who had not only uncovered their operation, but had also ensured her safety. Realizing they were cornered, Cornelius made one last attempt at deception. "Mrs. Whitmore, I can see you're a woman of intelligence and compassion. What if I told you that our work has brought comfort to hundreds? Sometimes the appearance of healing is just as valuable as actual healing." Margaret's response was firm. "You're asking me to become complicit in murder. I've seen your records. I know how many genuinely sick people you've killed to maintain your reputation." The conversation dragged on for another hour, with the brothers offering bribes, threats, and justifications. They offered Margaret large sums of money to remain silent, promised to stop their operation if she agreed to keep their secrets, and even suggested she could become a partner in their enterprise. But Margaret was unmoved. Finally, Obadiah made a statement that would later be used in court to prove premeditation. "You've forced us to choose between our life's work and your silence. We've spent years building something that gives meaning to people's lives, and we cannot let your misguided sense of justice destroy it." Margaret recognized the desperation in his words. They were no longer speaking from a place of calculated control, but from a position of panic. She backed toward the chapel door, eyes still on the three men, and said, "I'm leaving now. I'm going to make sure the authorities know what you've been doing here. The families who've lost loved ones deserve to know the truth, and those you've defrauded deserve justice." As she stepped into the cold December night, Ezekiel called after her, "Mrs. Whitmore, you have no idea what you've set in motion. Our work is bigger than you understand. There are others who will continue what we've started." Margaret didn't look back as she walked through the snow toward Salem. She knew her investigation had uncovered one of the most sophisticated criminal enterprises in American history. What she didn't know was that her revelations would expose connections to similar operations across multiple states, revealing that the Hawthorne Brothers network extended far beyond their sanctuary in Massachusetts. Her actions triggered an investigation that would uncover a sprawling criminal network involving dozens of individuals. On December 22, 1839, Sheriff Thomas Hartwell and his deputies arrived at the Divine Healing Sanctuary to find the brothers had fled, leaving behind their extensive documentation and laboratory equipment. The investigation revealed that the Hawthorne brothers had been in contact with similar operations in Connecticut, New York, Pennsylvania, and Virginia. Their correspondence found in Cornelius's locked chest showed they had been sharing techniques and compounds with other fraudulent healers, creating a network of coordinated medical fraud that had been operating for nearly a decade. District Attorney William Morrison, who led the prosecution, called the investigation the largest and most far-reaching criminal inquiry in American history. The brothers had maintained contact with 17 individuals, running similar operations ranging from small schemes targeting individual families to large sanctuaries, attracting patients from across the region. The network had developed standardized methods for creating artificial illnesses, training new operators, and even sharing information about wealthy families to target for scams. The brothers had essentially franchised their operation, providing compounds and techniques to associates in exchange for percentages of their profits. When authorities raided the other locations in the brothers' correspondence, they found evidence of identical operations in Hartford, Albany, Philadelphia, and Richmond. Coordinated raids on January 15, 1840, resulted in the arrest of 14 individuals and the discovery of extensive documentation that revealed the scope of the network. The evidence showed that over 400 genuinely ill patients had died across 5 states, and thousands of families had been defrauded of their life savings. The artificial illness schemes had generated over $200,000 in fraudulent payments, making it one of the most financially successful criminal enterprises in American history at the time. But what law enforcement uncovered next was even more horrifying. The brothers had been using their patients as unwilling test subjects in what they called compound research. Sheriff Hartwell's report described evidence of systematic human experimentation, rivaling the most disturbing accounts of medical abuse in Europe. The Hawthorne brothers had been testing increasingly dangerous combinations of chemicals to observe their effects on the human body. The laboratory was filled with meticulous documentation of their experiments, each one a calculated step in refining their compounds for exploitation. The search for the brothers stretched across multiple states, with federal marshals joining the hunt after evidence suggested they had fled beyond state jurisdiction. The investigation was complicated by the brothers' use of multiple identities and safe houses throughout it all. Margaret Whitmore became the key witness. Her detailed testimony about the laboratory and her confrontation with the brothers was crucial in exposing the full scope of their crimes. When the trial began in September 1840, it captured national attention. Newspapers covered the proceedings, and the courtroom was filled with victims' families, medical professionals, and religious leaders eager to understand how such a sophisticated deception had persisted for so long. The prosecution painted a damning picture of calculated cruelty, systematically exploiting human desperation for financial gain. Witness after witness testified about the artificial illnesses they had suffered and the enormous fees paid for fake cures. Families who had lost loved ones during treatment spoke out, finally understanding that their loved ones had been murdered rather than called home by God. The defense tried to argue that the brothers truly believed in their healing abilities, claiming that their documentation was part of their spiritual journey to understand divine intervention. But the extensive evidence of premeditation, the cold calculation behind their actions, and their clear financial motives made this defense impossible to uphold. The case took a dramatic turn when Ezekiel Hawthorne, the youngest brother and the mastermind behind the brothers' chemical operation, was captured in Baltimore in November 1840. Unlike his brothers who maintained their innocence, Ezekiel cooperated with authorities in exchange for a reduced sentence. His testimony over 3 days shocked even the prosecutors. Ezekiel revealed the cold logic behind their so-called medical theater elaborate performances, designed to simulate miraculous healings, which were more about generating profit than providing actual cures. People needed to believe in miracles more than in real healing, Ezekiel explained. Our artificial illnesses and cures gave them experiences that strengthened their faith and gave them hope, even if the effects were only temporary. But Ezekiel also revealed the chilling truth behind their murders. When asked about the patients who had died, he explained, "Genuinely ill patients were a problem for our reputation. We built our success on a 100% healing rate, and we couldn't let real diseases damage our credibility. The transition medicine we provided ensured that these patients died peacefully, and their families found comfort in believing they had been called home by God." The prosecution then revealed a key piece of evidence journals found in Ezekiel's Baltimore laboratory detailing advanced research. These journals documented experiments conducted without patients' knowledge or consent, designed to test the effects of various compounds on the human body. The compounds tested included those that could cause temporary blindness, paralysis, skin conditions, respiratory problems, and even mental confusion. Each compound had been tested on multiple patients with the results carefully recorded for future use. This revelation added an entirely new layer to the case, exposing the brothers' operations as not just fraudulent but deeply immoral. Their entire system had been designed not only to defraud, but to experiment on the very people they claimed to heal, and the evidence was irrefutable. The trial, which had already been one of the most shocking cases in American history, now took on an even darker tone, revealing the depth of the Hawthorne brothers' depravity. Their network had not only defrauded thousands of families, but had subjected patients to unimaginable horrors in the name of healing. The most disturbing revelation came when Ezekiel described the brothers' long-term ambitions. They had been working toward what they called medical legitimacy. Their ultimate plan was to transition from fraudulent healing to becoming recognized medical researchers. They hoped to use their accumulated wealth and documented research to establish a legitimate medical institution where they could continue their human experiments under the guise of scientific advancement. We believed Ezekiel testified that our research would eventually contribute to genuine medical breakthroughs. The compounds we developed and the systematic documentation of their effects represented valuable scientific knowledge that would benefit humanity. The methods we used were necessary to advance medical understanding in ways traditional research could never achieve. The prosecution's final witness, Dr. Henry Patterson, a physician from Harvard Medical School, provided the scientific context that helped the jury grasp the true nature of the brothers' crimes. Dr. Patterson explained that the Hawthorne brothers' work was not medical research but systematic human experimentation for financial gain. Their compounds were not treatments but weapons used to create artificial suffering. Their scientific documentation, while detailed, represented calculated cruelty, not medical advancement. The jury deliberated for only 6 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges. The brothers were sentenced to death for murder, with the judge declaring that their crimes assaulted the trust between healers and patients and perverted religious faith. However, even as justice seemed assured, the full scope of the Hawthorne network continued to unfold. Ezekiel's cooperation led authorities to a hidden warehouse in Boston, where the brothers had stored their wealth and research materials. The warehouse contained over $60,000 in cash and gold, hundreds of chemical compounds, and what prosecutors called the most comprehensive collection of human experimentation data in American history. Among the materials was Ezekiel's master research journal, which detailed plans to expand their operation nationwide, targeting major cities and seeking associates as far west as St. Louis and as far south as New Orleans. The brothers had envisioned creating a network of fraudulent healing sanctuaries across the country. The ledger revealed they had developed advanced compounds that could create symptoms indistinguishable from serious diseases like consumption heart conditions and certain forms of madness. They intended to expand beyond their traditional illnesses, paralysis, blindness, and tumors, encompassing virtually every major medical condition known to 19th century medicine. Perhaps most chilling was the discovery of Ezekiel's elimination protocols, which detailed procedures for killing patients in ways that would appear natural and avoid suspicion during autopsies. These methods included inducing heart failure, respiratory collapse, and strokes conditions that would leave no trace of foul play. The execution of Cornelius and Obadiah Hawthorne on March 15, 1841, marked the end of their criminal careers, but not the end of their influence. Ezekiel, whose cooperation secured him a life sentence instead of execution, continued to provide information about similar operations across the country for years after his brothers' deaths. His revelations led to the discovery of fraudulent healing operations in 12 additional states, resulting in over 50 arrests, and the recovery of evidence documenting crimes spanning nearly 2 decades. The Hawthorne Network, as investigators termed it, was far more extensive than anyone had realized. The brothers had been training associates in their methods since 1836, providing detailed manuals and starter supplies to individuals wishing to run their own fraudulent healing operations. These associates operated independently, but shared information and techniques with the central network, forming a web of criminal activity from Maine to Georgia. One of the most disturbing discoveries was a series of letters between Ezekiel and a physician in Charleston, South Carolina, discussing the possibility of using their compounds to create artificial slave illnesses for propaganda purposes. The letters indicated that some slaveholders considered using fraudulent healing demonstrations to support claims about the supposed benefits of slavery on African American health. The medical community reacted swiftly and comprehensively to the Hawthorne revelations. Medical schools began requiring courses on identifying fraudulent treatments, and professional associations established committees to investigate suspicious healing claims. The case became a turning point in American medical practice, leading to increased regulation and oversight of alternative healing methods. Religious communities were similarly affected by the scandal. Many denominations issued statements distancing themselves from faith healing practices and set guidelines for evaluating miraculous claims. The Hawthorne case became a cautionary tale about the dangers of mixing religious faith with medical treatment, influencing theological discussions on divine intervention for decades. Perhaps the most lasting impact of the Hawthorne case was on public trust in medical authority. The revelation that respected physicians could engage in such widespread deception led to increased skepticism about medical claims and a greater demand for evidence-based treatment. This case contributed to the development of more rigorous medical testing procedures and ethical guidelines, which evolved into modern medical standards. Margaret Whitmore, whose bravery had exposed the entire network, became a prominent advocate for medical reform and patient rights. Her courage and determination not only helped dismantle the Hawthorne Network, but also spurred changes that would reshape the landscape of American medicine for years to come. Margaret Whitmore used her harrowing experience to establish one of America's first patient advocacy organizations. She worked tirelessly to educate families about medical fraud and offer support to victims of fraudulent treatments. Her efforts led to the passage of Massachusetts's first medical fraud prevention laws in 1845, which required healers to prove their training and prohibited administering undisclosed substances to patients. These laws became a model for similar legislation across the country, helping lay the groundwork for modern medical regulation. In 1871, 30 years after the Hawthorne brothers' execution, Massachusetts authorities received an unexpected letter from the state prison. Ezekiel Hawthorne, now 69 and dying from consumption, requested a final meeting with investigators to reveal what he called the complete truth about their operation. The meeting, held in the prison infirmary on a cold February morning, provided the final pieces to the puzzle that had haunted investigators for decades. Ezekiel, his voice weak but mind still sharp, stunned even the most experienced investigators with his admission. "Everything you discovered about our operation," he whispered, "was only the surface of what we accomplished. The artificial illnesses, the murders, the financial fraud, these were just the visible aspects of a much larger experiment in human behavior and social control." Ezekiel explained that the brothers had been conducting what they called faith manipulation research, systematic studies of how religious belief could be exploited to control human behavior. Their healing ceremonies, he confessed, were designed not just to generate profit, but to gather data on the psychological mechanisms governing faith, hope, and desperation. "We documented everything," Ezekiel said. "Every patient's reactions, every family's responses, every community's interpretation of our work. We were creating a comprehensive understanding of how humans respond to the promise of miraculous intervention." His journals, he revealed, contained not just medical data, but detailed psychological profiles of human vulnerability. This revelation was staggering. The brothers had been conducting one of the first systematic studies of psychological manipulation in American history, using their patients as unwitting subjects in experiments designed to understand human gullibility and the power of false hope. Ezekiel also revealed that their network had been sharing this psychological data with associates beyond medical fraud, politicians seeking to manipulate public opinion, businessmen looking to refine advertising techniques, and more. "We proved," Ezekiel said, his voice barely audible, "that human beings will believe almost anything if it's presented with sufficient authority and wrapped in the promise of miraculous intervention." But Ezekiel's final revelation was the most disturbing. Hidden beneath his prison cell's floorboards was a single journal that he called his ultimate research. This journal contained plans for using their psychological manipulation techniques on a massive scale. The journal outlined strategies for creating artificial crises, exploiting community vulnerabilities, and maintaining long-term deception through careful management of evidence and witnesses. The journal was, as investigators soon realized, a comprehensive manual for large-scale social manipulation disguised as scientific research. "Our work at the sanctuary," Ezekiel concluded, "was never really about healing or money. It was about proving that human society is built on foundations that can be systematically undermined by those who understand the mechanisms of faith and fear." Ezekiel Hawthorne died 3 days later, taking with him the full details of psychological manipulation techniques that would not be formally studied for another century. His journal remained sealed by court order until 1971, when it was finally released to academic researchers studying the history of medical fraud. The Divine Healing Sanctuary remained abandoned for over 30 years after the Hawthorne brothers' arrest. Local residents reported strange sounds and unexplained lights emanating from the building, fueling rumors that it was haunted by the spirits of the brothers' victims. In reality, these phenomena were likely caused by chemical residues from Ezekiel's laboratory, which continued to emit vapors and create reactions in the building's materials. In 1872, the building was demolished by order of the Salem City Council, but workers discovered something that had been missed during the original investigation. Beneath the laboratory, Ezekiel had constructed a hidden chamber containing his most sensitive research materials. This room contained detailed documentation of experiments that made even the known horrors of their operation pale in comparison. The final chamber revealed that the brothers had been testing their compounds on children, using patients' families as unwitting accomplices in experiments designed to observe how artificial illnesses affected developing minds and bodies. The documents showed that they had created specific compounds to induce developmental delays, behavioral changes, and learning difficulties in young patients. The discovery of these documents was deemed too disturbing to be released to the public, and they were sealed permanently accessible only to researchers studying the prevention of medical abuse. Today, the site of the Divine Healing Sanctuary is a small park dedicated to the memory of the victims. A simple granite monument lists the names of the 400 confirmed victims with an inscription that reads, "In memory of those who suffered and died seeking healing and hope. May their tragedy serve as a warning about the dangers of false promises and the importance of questioning those who claim miraculous powers." Margaret Whitmore lived to 87, spending her final decades advocating for the prevention of medical fraud and supporting victims of deceptive healing practices. Her autobiography, published in 1885, became one of the first detailed accounts of medical fraud investigation and influenced the development of consumer protection laws throughout the United States. Her daughter, Sarah Whitmore, whose artificial illness had first exposed the brothers' operation, became a physician. She dedicated her career to legitimate medical research and the treatment of victims of medical fraud, establishing one of America's first clinics specifically for people recovering from fraudulent treatments. The Hawthorne case fundamentally changed American medicine. It led to the establishment of medical licensing requirements, ethical review boards, and patient protection laws that continue to govern medical practice today. The brothers' crimes demonstrated the need for systematic oversight of medical claims and the importance of requiring extraordinary evidence for extraordinary claims. Perhaps the most important legacy of the Hawthorne case is its demonstration of the courage required to challenge respected authority figures when they abuse their positions of trust. Margaret Whitmore's willingness to investigate suspicious circumstances and confront dangerous criminals showed that ordinary citizens armed with determination and careful investigation can expose even the most sophisticated deceptions. The complete story of the Hawthorne brothers' crimes serves as a chilling reminder that evil often disguises itself as virtue, and the fight for truth and justice requires unwavering resolve. The Hawthorne brothers' story serves as a chilling reminder of the dangers of exploitation masked as compassion. Those who prey on human vulnerability often present themselves as healers and helpers, capitalizing on our deepest needs for hope, healing, and faith. In an age where medical misinformation and fraudulent healing claims continue to exploit vulnerable populations, the Hawthorne case remains a stark example of why skeptical inquiry and evidence-based evaluation are essential protections against those who would abuse our trust and exploit our desperation. The brothers built their empire on the universal human need to believe in miraculous intervention in times of suffering and loss. Their crimes thrived because they understood that people's desire for hope could override their capacity for skepticism. Desperation made even intelligent individuals susceptible to their elaborate deception, but their eventual exposure and punishment proved that truth, however deeply buried, has a way of surfacing. Evidence-based investigation can unmask even the most sophisticated lies, and justice, though delayed, can ultimately prevail over calculated evil. The story of the Divine Healing Sanctuary teaches us that behind every claim of a miracle, there is either a genuine phenomenon that can withstand rigorous scrutiny or a deception that crumbles under determined inquiry. The Hawthorne brothers chose deception, and that choice led to their undoing, sparing countless future victims from falling into their trap. What do you think about this terrifying tale of medical deception and systematic murder? The Hawthorne brothers' story shows just how easily trust can be manipulated and how dangerous false hope can become when it's manufactured by those who profit from human desperation. Have you ever encountered situations where medical or healing claims seemed too good to be true? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear from our community of truth seekers. If this investigation sent chills down your spine, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss our explorations into America's darkest secrets. Only by understanding these historical horrors can we protect ourselves from similar deceptions today. Until next time, keep questioning, keep investigating, and never stop seeking the truth, no matter how disturbing it might be. Thank you everyone for watching the video. Remember to like and subscribe to the channel to watch the next interesting videos.